The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty parlor as Eleanor Whitmore sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap like a porcelain doll someone had forgotten to put away. Through the thin walls, she could hear them discussing her fate, her husband Samuel, his father Judge Whitmore, and his brothers, their voices rising and falling like thunder before a storm. 3 years. Father. 3 years and not even a miscarriage to show for it. Samuel's voice cut through the wall, sharp with disappointment. The doctor says she's barren as winter wheat. Eleanor closed her eyes, each word landing like a physical blow. She had endured countless examinations, drunk every tonic the traveling doctors prescribed, even made pilgrimages to healing springs 2 counties over. Nothing. Her womb remained as empty as the promises Samuel had whispered on their wedding night. The Apache are offering 20 head of cattle and winter provisions. Judge Whitmore's gravelly voice responded. That's more than fair for damaged goods. Damaged goods. Eleanor's fingers tightened until her knuckles went white. Is that what 3 years of marriage had reduced her to? A broken thing to be bartered away like surplus inventory? The door swung open, and Samuel entered, avoiding her gaze. Behind him stood his father, a man who ruled his ranch and family with the same iron fist he'd once used to hang horse thieves as a territorial judge. Eleanor, the judge began, his tone suggesting he was addressing livestock rather than his daughter-in-law. Arrangements have been made. You'll be leaving at dawn. Leaving? The word came out as barely a whisper. She already knew. Had known since the Apache traders arrived 3 days ago and the men had locked themselves away in hushed conference. But hearing it spoken aloud made it real. The Apache need women. You need a purpose. It's a practical solution. The judge's weathered face showed no emotion. You'll take your personal effects. Nothing that belongs to the Whitmore name. Eleanor stood, surprising herself with the steadiness of her legs. And if I refuse? Samuel finally looked at her then, and what she saw in his eyes was worse than anger. It was relief. You won't, he said simply. You have nowhere else to go. He was right. Her parents were dead. Her sister married to a shopkeeper in California who could barely feed his own children. The Whitmores had made sure she understood her position perfectly. Comply or find herself cast out with nothing but the clothes on her back. That night, Eleanor packed by candlelight. Her wedding dress went back in the armoire. It belonged to the Whitmores now, like everything else she'd thought was hers. She folded 2 plain dresses, her mother's prayer book, a small sewing kit, and the daguerreotype of her parents taken just before their death from scarlet fever. Everything she owned fit into a single carpet bag. At dawn, they loaded her into the wagon like cargo. Samuel didn't come to see her off. She'd heard him ride out before sunrise, probably to avoid the awkwardness of goodbye. Only the judge and his foreman Jake attended her departure, along with 2 Apache traders who would escort her to their territory. The wagon lurched forward, and Eleanor gripped the rough wooden seat to keep from being thrown about. The traders rode ahead on their painted ponies, occasionally glancing back as if checking their merchandise hadn't fallen off the wagon. The journey stretched across 3 days of October heat and bitter cold nights. They followed trails that grew progressively rougher, leaving behind the tamed ranchlands for wild country where red rock formations rose like ancient sentinels. Eleanor had never traveled this far from civilization. Each mile took her deeper into an alien landscape of juniper, sage, and endless sky. On the 2nd day, they encountered a rattlesnake sunning itself on the trail. One of the traders, a wiry man with silver ornaments in his hair, dismounted and killed it with practiced efficiency, skinning it and offering Eleanor a strip of the meat that evening. She forced herself to chew and swallow, knowing she needed strength for whatever lay ahead. The cold grew worse as they climbed into the mountains. Eleanor pulled her thin shawl tighter, her teeth chattering as the wagon wheels caught on rocks and roots. Once, when they stopped to water the horses at a stream, she caught her reflection and hardly recognized the woman staring back, hair escaping its pins, face streaked with dust, eyes hollow with exhaustion and fear. On the morning of the 4th day, They crested a rise, and Eleanor saw the Apache settlement spread below, a collection of wickiups and more permanent structures nestled in a valley between red cliffs. Smoke rose from cooking fires, and she could see figures moving between the dwellings. Dogs barked at their approach, and children ran alongside the wagon, pointing and chattering in a language she couldn't understand. The traders led her to the center of the settlement, where a group had gathered. Eleanor's legs nearly buckled when she climbed down from the wagon. She stood there, carpetbag clutched in her hands, as the traders spoke to an elderly man who seemed to hold authority. Money and goods changed hands, payment for her delivery. Then the crowd parted, and Eleanor saw him for the first time. He stood apart from the others, taller than most, with the kind of stillness that made everything around him seem to be in motion. His face was angular, weathered by sun and wind, with dark eyes that seemed to look through her rather than at her, unlike the other men who wore traditional dress. He dressed in a mixture of Apache and white man's clothing, leather leggings, a cotton shirt, boots that had seen better days. The elderly man gestured between them, speaking rapidly. The tall man, she would later learn his name was Taza, listened without expression. When the elder finished, Taza walked forward and looked down at Eleanor. She forced herself to meet his gaze, though every instinct screamed at her to run. He studied her for a long moment, then spoke in clear, unaccented English. "I never wanted children." The words hung in the air between them. Eleanor felt her mouth drop open slightly. Of all the things she'd expected, commands, threats, even violence, this strange declaration wasn't among them. Around them, the crowd began to disperse. Apparently considering the transaction complete, Taza turned and began walking toward the edge of the settlement. When Eleanor didn't immediately follow, he paused and looked back. "Come." She grabbed her carpetbag and hurried after him, her boots slipping on the rocky ground. They walked in silence through the settlement, past curious faces and cooking fires, past plots of corn and squash, until they reached a narrow trail leading up into the forest. The path wound through pine and aspen trees, the settlement noise fading behind them. Eleanor's chest burned with the effort of keeping up with his long strides at this altitude, just when she thought she might collapse. They emerged into a small clearing where a modest wooden cabin stood, clearly built with some knowledge of white man's construction but adapted to its surroundings. Taza pushed open the door and went inside without ceremony. Eleanor hesitated on the threshold, her heart pounding. This was it, the moment where her new life would truly begin, whatever horrors or hardships it might hold. The interior was sparse but clean, a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table and 2 chairs, shelves holding supplies and tools. In the corner, a single bed with wool blankets, just one bed. Eleanor's stomach clenched. Taza was already at the fireplace, stirring the banked coals to life. "You can sleep there," he said without turning, gesturing to the bed. "I sleep outside mostly." Eleanor set down her carpetbag, confusion adding to her fear. "I don't understand," she said, hating how small her voice sounded. Why did you take me if you don't want—" "The tribal council insisted I needed a woman. I disagreed." He stood, dusting his hands on his leggings. "But they made the trade without consulting me, so here we are." He moved past her to the door. "There's venison in the smokehouse, water from the stream, don't wander at night, mountain cats." Then he was gone, leaving Eleanor standing alone in the cabin that was now, apparently, her home. She sank onto the single chair, finally allowing the tears she'd held back for 4 days to fall. But even as she wept, a tiny, treacherous spark of something that might have been relief flickered in her chest. For the first time in 3 years, she was with a man who didn't want anything from her body, a man who looked at her and didn't see a failed womb, but simply another unwanted burden to bear. It was cold comfort, but in that moment, it was enough. Outside, the October wind rattled the cabin walls, and Eleanor Whitmore— no, she wasn't a Whitmore anymore. Was she? began her first night in a new world where being barren might not be the worst thing after all. The first gray light of dawn crept through the cabin's single window, and Eleanor woke with a start. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then the events of the previous day came rushing back. She sat up on the narrow bed, still wearing her travel-stained dress, and listened. No sound came from within the cabin, but outside she could hear the rhythmic thunk of an axe striking wood. Peering through the window, she saw Taza splitting logs with mechanical precision, his breath visible in the cold morning air. He'd removed his shirt despite the chill, and she could see old scars crisscrossing his back. Some from battles, perhaps. Others from things she couldn't imagine. Eleanor pulled her shawl around her shoulders and ventured outside. Taza didn't acknowledge her presence, just continued his work. The pile of split wood grew steadily. Eleanor stood awkwardly for a moment, then retreated inside to explore her new surroundings in daylight. The cabin was better supplied than she'd initially thought. The shelves held sacks of cornmeal, dried beans, strips of jerky, and various roots and herbs she didn't recognize. Iron pots hung from hooks near the fireplace. She found a water bucket by the door, empty. The stream, he'd said. She could hear water somewhere beyond the trees. Taking the bucket, Eleanor followed the sound until she found a clear mountain stream tumbling over smooth rocks. She knelt and filled the bucket, gasping at the icy temperature. The water was so cold it made her teeth ache, but it was cleaner than anything she'd had at the Whitmore ranch. When she returned, Taza had finished with the wood and was skinning a rabbit. He worked with quick, efficient movements, his knife flashing in the morning sun. Eleanor set the water bucket down and watched, remembering how Samuel's mother had always shielded her from such unpleasant tasks. Here, she realized, there would be no such luxury. "I can cook," she offered quietly, "if you show me where things are." Taza glanced at her, then nodded toward a wooden box near the door. "Salt, herbs in the clay pots, fire needs building up." It was more words than he'd spoken since yesterday. Eleanor took it as progress. She managed to get a decent stew going with the rabbit, some wild onions she found hanging in bunches, and herbs that smelled like sage. Taza ate in silence, but he cleaned his bowl, which she took as approval. After the meal, he disappeared again, leaving her alone with her thoughts and the unfamiliar sounds of the forest. The isolation was absolute. No neighboring ranch wives to call on, no church socials, no general store where she might linger over fabric selections. Just the cabin, the forest, and the man who clearly wished she wasn't there. On the third day, Eleanor discovered the cold reality of bathing in the wilderness. She'd grown uncomfortable in her unwashed state and finally asked Taza about washing. He pointed her toward a deeper pool upstream, hidden by a cluster of boulders. The water was brutally cold. Eleanor stripped quickly, aware that Taza could return at any moment, and plunged in before she could lose her nerve. The shock drove all breath from her lungs. She scrubbed hastily with the harsh lye soap she'd found in the cabin, her skin turning blue with cold. But when she emerged and dried herself with her petticoat, she felt more human than she had since leaving the ranch. As she dressed, a strange sensation washed over her. Not quite freedom, but something like it. No one was watching her, judging her, finding her wanting. The forest didn't care that she was barren. The stream didn't gossip about her failures. She could simply exist. That evening, Taza returned with a deer slung over his shoulders. Eleanor watched from the doorway as he strung it up for butchering. His movements were economical, practiced. Nothing was wasted. Meat for eating, hide for tanning, bones for tools or soup. This was survival stripped to its essence. "I want to learn," Eleanor said suddenly. "How to do that? All of it." Taza paused in his work, studying her with those dark, unreadable eyes. "Why?" "Because I'm here," she said simply. "And I won't be useless." Something shifted in his expression, not quite approval, but perhaps a lessening of dismissal. "Tomorrow," he said, and went back to his work. Days blended into a routine. Taza taught her things the Whitmore women would have been horrified by. How to skin game, preserve meat, identify edible plants from poisonous ones. His teaching style was sparse, demonstrating more than explaining. But Eleanor found she preferred it. There was no condescension in his silence, no impatience with her mistakes. She learned that he left before dawn most days to check trap lines or hunt. He traded with both his tribe and occasionally with white trappers who passed through, maintaining a careful neutrality between worlds. His cabin sat deliberately apart from the main Apache settlement, close enough for trade and far enough for solitude. The first time Eleanor burned their dinner, distracted by trying to mend a tear in her dress, she cringed, waiting for the sharp words or the back of a hand across her face that Samuel would have delivered. Instead, Taza simply scraped the charred mess into the fire and pulled out some jerky to chew. "Tomorrow you'll watch closer," was all he said. 2 weeks into her new life, a windstorm struck with sudden violence. Eleanor had been gathering kindling when the sky darkened and the wind rose to a howl. Pine branches whipped overhead, and she heard the crack of breaking wood. She ran for the cabin as the first fat raindrops fell. Inside, the wind found every gap in the walls, sending cold fingers through the space. The door rattled on its hinges. Eleanor built up the fire and huddled near it, but as night fell and the storm intensified, fear crept in. Where was Taza? He'd gone to check distant traps and hadn't returned. A particularly violent gust shook the entire cabin, and Eleanor heard something crash outside. She pulled a blanket around her shoulders, trying to stop her trembling. The Whitmore house had been solid brick, proof against any weather. This cabin felt like it might blow away entirely, taking her with it. The door burst open, and Taza stumbled in, soaked through and carrying something wrapped in his coat. He kicked the door shut against the wind and moved immediately to the fire. Eleanor saw that his bundle was a young fox, injured and barely breathing. "Hold her," he commanded, the most direct order he'd given her. Eleanor took the trembling creature while Taza examined its leg. Broken. He splinted it with surprising gentleness, his large hands delicate in their movements. The fox whimpered but didn't bite. "She'll live," he said, settling the animal in a box near the fire. "Storm spooked her into a ravine." They sat by the fire as the storm raged outside. Eleanor realized she was shivering, from cold or delayed fear. She wasn't sure. Without thinking, she moved closer to Taza's warmth. He stiffened but didn't pull away. "I was frightened," she admitted quietly. The cabin felt like it might collapse. "It won't," he said. "I built it to last." There was pride in his voice, the first real emotion she'd heard from him. Emboldened. Eleanor asked, "Why do you live apart from your people?" For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "They want things from me I won't give. It's easier alone." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Eleanor understood too well the weight of others' expectations, the suffocation of failing to meet them, without conscious thought. She pulled her blanket wider and draped half around his shoulders. They sat that way through the worst of the storm, not touching except where the shared blanket created a bridge between them. When the wind finally died near dawn, Eleanor realized she'd dozed against Taza's shoulder. She jerked upright, apologies on her lips, but he was already moving away, checking on the injured fox. "She made it through," he said, giving the animal water from his cupped palm. Survivors recognize each other. Eleanor wasn't sure if he meant the fox or her, but something warm unfurled in her chest at the words. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean and glittering with morning dew. She stepped onto the cabin's threshold and breathed deeply of the pine-scented air, for the first time since leaving the Whitmore ranch. She didn't wish herself back there. This life was harder, lonelier, more uncertain than anything she'd known. But in its harsh simplicity, she was finding something she'd never had before, the space to exist without apology, without the constant weight of her failure to conceive. Taza appeared beside her, carrying his hunting rifle. "Today you'll learn to shoot," he announced. "A woman alone needs to defend herself." "I won't be alone," Eleanor said without thinking. "You're here." He looked at her sharply, and she feared she'd overstepped, but he merely adjusted his rifle and started toward the forest. "I won't always be. Learn anyway." As she followed him into the tree line for her first shooting lesson, Eleanor realized that somewhere between the storm and the sunrise, the terrible fear that had gripped her since the day she'd been traded away had begun to loosen its hold. She was still a stranger in a strange land, still uncertain of her place or her future, but she was no longer just cargo delivered and forgotten. She was learning to survive. The hidden meadow revealed itself like a secret whispered by the mountain. Eleanor had been following deer tracks, practicing the hunting skills Taza had taught her, when she pushed through a thick curtain of willow branches and gasped. Before her stretched a small valley carpeted with late autumn wildflowers, purple asters, golden rabbit brush, and the last defiant blooms of Indian paintbrush. A spring bubbled up from rocks at the far end, creating a small pool before trickling away as a stream. The whole space was protected by high rock walls on 3 sides, creating a natural shelter from wind and weather. Eleanor sank to her knees in the grass, overwhelmed by the unexpected beauty. This was nothing like the manicured gardens at the Whitmore Ranch. This was wild, unplanned, thriving without any human hand to guide it. She spent the entire afternoon there, gathering seeds from the spent flowers and carefully wrapping them in her handkerchief. Come spring, she would try to create something of her own. When she returned to the cabin at dusk, Taza was skinning a rabbit by the door. He glanced at her dirt-stained hands and the bulge of seeds in her pocket, but said nothing. Eleanor had learned to read his silences. This one held a faint curiosity. "I found a meadow," she said, unable to contain her excitement. "Hidden past the deer trail. There's water and shelter from wind. I thought maybe I could grow things there. Vegetables, herbs." "Winter's coming," he said, returning to his work. "I know, but I gathered seeds for spring." She pulled out her handkerchief to show him. "My mother kept a garden. She taught me about soil and seasons." Taza finished with the rabbit and stood, wiping his hands. The women in the village grow crops. They might trade knowledge for work. It was the longest response he'd given to any of her plans. Eleanor took it as encouragement. The next market day, she ventured into the Apache settlement alone for the first time. Taza had pointed out the path but hadn't offered to accompany her. "They won't hurt you," was all he said. "You belong to me. That gives you protection." The words should have stung, belong to, like property. But Eleanor understood the practicality of it. In this world, such belonging meant safety. The market was a cluster of women with goods spread on blankets, baskets, pottery, dried foods, beadwork. Eleanor approached cautiously, her few Apache words rehearsed. "Shikisen," she said to an older woman with kind eyes. "Friend." The woman studied her, then responded in broken English. "You are the one who lives with Taza." "Yes. He is difficult man, alone too much." The woman gestured to her goods. "What you need?" Eleanor knelt and examined the woman's seeds and dried plants, asking questions with gestures and her limited vocabulary. The woman, who introduced herself as Maria, had married into the tribe years ago from a Mexican settlement. She spoke enough English to bridge the language gap. "You want to plant? I show you our ways, but you help me with my arthritis hands. Hard to weave now." It was the beginning of Eleanor's integration into the edges of tribal life. 3 times a week, she would visit Maria, helping with basket weaving while learning about indigenous farming methods, the 3 sisters of corn, beans, and squash, how to read the mountain weather, which wild plants could supplement cultivated ones. The other women watched her with curiosity, but gradually began including her in their conversations. Eleanor picked up Apache phrases through immersion, her tongue slowly wrapping around the unfamiliar sounds. She learned their names: Ayana, who made the finest pottery; Nayeli, whose beadwork was prized; Sonseare, who knew every medicinal plant on the mountain. Taza observed these developments without comment, but Eleanor noticed small changes. He began bringing extra game when she mentioned the elderly Maria's struggle to feed her grandchildren. He repaired the cabin's door to open more smoothly after she complained about wrestling with it. Once, she found a new iron pot waiting by the fireplace, better for the stews she'd been making with her garden planning. November arrived with its sharp teeth. Eleanor's hidden meadow lay under early snow, but she had mapped it carefully in her mind, planning where each crop would go come spring. Inside the warm cabin, she practiced basketry while Taza worked leather or maintained his weapons. They had developed a comfortable rhythm of coexistence, moving around each other with practiced ease. One evening, as she struggled with a particularly complex weave pattern, Taza surprised her by reaching over to guide her hands. "Like this," he said, demonstrating the technique. Tighter at the base. His hands were warm and calloused, careful as they corrected her grip. Eleanor found herself holding her breath, hyper-aware of his proximity. Since that night during the storm, they had maintained careful physical distance. Now, with his hands over hers, she felt that same electricity. "Thank you," she managed when he pulled away. He nodded and returned to his own work, but Eleanor caught him glancing at her throughout the evening. Something was shifting between them, subtle as snowmelt. The fever struck without warning. Eleanor woke one morning feeling sluggish, attributing it to the hard work of recent days. By noon, she was burning up, her head pounding with each heartbeat. She tried to continue her daily tasks, but collapsed by the water bucket, the world spinning violently. Taza found her there when he returned from checking traps. Without a word, he lifted her, she was shocked by how easily, and carried her to the bed. His hand on her forehead was blessedly cool. "Fever," he said, frowning. "How long?" "This morning," she gasped, teeth chattering despite the heat radiating from her skin. He moved with sudden urgency, gathering items from his medicine stores. Eleanor drifted in and out of consciousness, aware only of his presence, cool cloths on her face, bitter tea forced between her lips, strong hands holding her steady when seizures shook her body. Later, she would learn he had carried her through the night to the tribe's medicine woman, running through dark forest paths with her bundled in blankets. She remembered nothing but fragments, chanting, smoke that smelled of sage and cedar, hands that weren't Taza's checking her pulse and pupils. When real consciousness returned, she was back in the cabin, weak as a newborn kitten. Taza sat beside the bed, and she was shocked to see exhaustion etched on his face. How long had she been ill? 2 days, he said, reading her confusion. "The fever broke last night. You stayed?" "Yes." Eleanor tried to sit up, but he pressed her back down. "Rest, drink." He helped her sip water, supporting her head with surprising gentleness. "Why?" she whispered, the question encompassing everything. Why had he fought so hard to save her? Why did he care whether she lived or died? Taza set down the water cup and looked at her directly. For once, his dark eyes weren't shuttered. "Because you don't demand anything from me. You don't ask me to be other than what I am. You just—" He paused, searching for words. "Exist alongside me. It's peaceful." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. "That's all I wanted, too. To just exist without failing anyone's expectations." "You haven't failed here," he said quietly. "The garden you plan, the women you help, the fox you nursed, that's not failure." The fox in question chose that moment to emerge from its box by the fireplace, limping slightly but mobile. It had stayed after healing, a wild thing that chose domesticity. Like her, Eleanor thought. She reached out, her hand trembling with weakness, and touched Taza's face. He went very still but didn't pull away. "Thank you," she whispered, "for saving me, for seeing me as more than what I couldn't provide." He caught her hand, holding it against his cheek for a moment before carefully placing it back on the blanket. "Rest now. Heal. Spring will come, and you'll need strength for your planting." As he moved away to tend the fire, Eleanor closed her eyes, feeling something fundamental shift in her chest. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was possibility, growing as quietly and steadily as seeds beneath snow. waiting for the right moment to bloom. Outside, November wind howled through the pines, but inside the cabin, warmed by fire and unexpected tenderness, Eleanor felt safer than she had in years. She was learning more than survival in this wilderness. She was learning that she might be worth saving, worth caring for, worth more than the children she couldn't bear, and perhaps, just perhaps, she was teaching Taza the same lesson about himself. The riders appeared on the ridge just after dawn, their silhouettes dark against the winter sky. Eleanor was drawing water from the stream when she heard the horses. Too many to be traders, too organized to be drifters. Her heart seized as she recognized the lead rider's posture. Thomas Whitmore, Samuel's younger brother. She dropped the bucket and ran for the cabin, but they had already seen her. "Eleanor!" Thomas's voice carried across the frozen ground. "Stay where you are!" Taza emerged from the forest with his rifle. Having heard the commotion, he took in the scene, 5 armed men. Eleanor frozen between the stream and cabin, and moved to position himself between her and the riders. "That's far enough," Taza called out, his rifle held ready but not yet aimed. Thomas dismounted, his hand resting on his pistol. Behind him were 3 ranch hands Eleanor recognized and a man in a black coat she didn't know, some kind of official, by his bearing. "We've come for Mrs. Whitmore," Thomas announced. "There's been a mistake. Her husband wants her back." Eleanor felt the world tilt. "What?" "Samuel's new wife can't conceive either," Thomas said, his eyes never leaving Taza. "Turns out the problem wasn't you after all. Doc says it's Samuel who's lacking. Father wants the original arrangement restored." The cruel irony of it struck Eleanor like a physical blow. 3 years of blame, of being called barren, worthless, damaged goods. And it had been Samuel all along. She wanted to laugh. She wanted to scream. "I'm not going back," she said, finding her voice. Thomas's expression hardened. "You don't have a choice. You're legally married to my brother. This," he gestured dismissively at Taza, "arrangement was never official, just Father's attempt to cut losses." The man in the black coat stepped forward. "I'm James Morrison, Territorial Magistrate, Mrs. Whitmore. Your husband has filed papers for your return. You belong with him, not with these heathens." "I belong to no one," Eleanor said, moving closer to Taza. "The Whitmores sold me. Money changed hands, by their own actions. I'm no longer part of that family." "Sold?" Morrison's eyebrows rose. "That's illegal. No white woman can be sold like property." "Then arrest Judge Whitmore." Eleanor shot back. "He's the one who negotiated the trade. 20 head of cattle and winter provisions. Wasn't it, Thomas?" Thomas had the grace to look uncomfortable. "That was a dowry, a cultural exchange. Now we're offering to buy you back properly. 50 head of cattle, plus horses. More than fair compensation to the savage." The word savage changed everything. Eleanor saw Taza's knuckles whiten on his rifle stock, saw the ranch hands shift nervously. Violence hung in the air like smoke before a fire. "His name is Taza," Eleanor said coldly. "And I'm not for sale. Not anymore." "You mouthy bitch," one of the ranch hands snarled. "After everything the family did for you." He never finished. Taza's rifle swung up, aimed directly at the man's chest. "Watch your tongue, or lose it." "See?" Morrison said urgently. "This is exactly why you need rescue, Mrs. Whitmore. These people are violent, uncivilized. Come with us voluntarily, and no one needs to get hurt." Eleanor laughed, surprising everyone, including herself. "Violent. The only violence I've known was in the civilized Whitmore house. Samuel's fists when I disappointed him. His mother's switch across my back. The doctor's brutal examinations to find out why I was defective." She pulled down her collar, showing old bruises that had never quite faded. "This is civilization? At least here. I'm not beaten for failing to bear children." Thomas shifted uncomfortably. They all knew Samuel's temper, had all turned blind eyes to it. That's between husband and wife. Private matters. Nothing was private. My body was discussed at family dinners like livestock breeding, my monthly cycles tracked on the kitchen calendar for all to see. Eleanor's voice rose. I was reduced to nothing but a walking womb, and when that womb stayed empty, I was thrown away. Eleanor, be reasonable. Thomas tried again. You're living in a shack with a half-breed who probably has 6 other wives. Is that really better than being mistress of the Whitmore Ranch? He has no other wives, Eleanor said firmly. He didn't even want me. The tribal council forced me on him, and he's treated me with more respect in 3 months than your family showed in 3 years. Taza spoke then, his voice carrying quiet authority. She's made her choice. Leave now, while you can. Morrison puffed up. You can't threaten officers of the law. His words were cut short as shapes emerged from the forest. Apache warriors, summoned by some signal Eleanor had missed. They stood silently among the trees, weapons visible but not raised. The message was clear. This was their territory. Thomas backed toward his horse. This isn't over. The law is on our side. We'll be back with the cavalry if necessary. Try it, Taza said simply. See how well soldiers navigate these mountains in winter. The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring. Finally, Morrison mounted his horse. Mrs. Whitmore, I urge you to reconsider. Your immortal soul is at stake, living in sin with a heathen. Then I'll take my chances with heathen kindness over Christian cruelty. Eleanor replied. They left then, spurring their horses harder than necessary, eager to be away from the silent watchers in the trees. Eleanor stood frozen until the sound of hoofbeats faded completely. Then her knees buckled. Taza caught her before she hit the ground, his arms strong and steady. They'll come back, she whispered against his chest. With soldiers, like they said. Maybe. He helped her stand, but didn't immediately let go. Are you certain? You could have a comfortable life again, position, wealth. Eleanor pulled back to look at him. I had those things. They came with a price I can't pay anymore. She touched his face, noting the surprise in his eyes. I choose this. I choose you. If you'll have me. Something shifted in his expression. He caught her hand, pressing it flat against his chest where she could feel his heartbeat. You defended me, called me by name. No white woman has ever— You're not a savage, Eleanor said fiercely. You're the most civilized man I've known. You took in a stranger you didn't want and treated her with dignity. You saved my life when fever took me. You see me as a person, not just a failed womb. The warriors had melted back into the forest, leaving them alone by the stream. Taza cupped her face in his hands, studying her as if seeing her for the first time. If you stay, it won't be easy. They'll make you choose, your world or mine. No going back. I've already chosen, Eleanor whispered. He kissed her then, their first kiss, gentle despite the wildness of the morning. It tasted of possibility and danger, of bridges burned and new paths taken. When they broke apart, Eleanor saw her own wonder reflected in his eyes. That evening, as they prepared dinner together, the cabin felt different. The space between them had collapsed, replaced by small touches. His hand on her back as he passed, her fingers brushing his when she handed him a plate. They didn't speak of the morning's confrontation, but it hung between them like a door that had been opened and couldn't be closed again. When night fell, Taza didn't leave for his usual bed under the stars. He stood by the door, uncertainty clear on his face. Stay, Eleanor said softly. Please. He crossed to her then, and they came together with desperate tenderness, two damaged souls finding solace in each other. When he held her afterward, Eleanor felt something she'd never experienced with Samuel, the feeling of being treasured, protected, chosen. They'll come back, she murmured against his shoulder. Let them come, Taza replied, his arms tightening around her. You're mine now. I don't give up what's mine. The word mine should have frightened her after years of being property. Instead, it warmed her from within, because she understood the difference now, being owned by someone who saw you as less than human, and belonging with someone who saw you as everything. Outside, snow began to fall, covering their tracks and the hoofprints of unwelcome visitors. Inside, Eleanor Whitmore, no, just Eleanor now, lay in the arms of a man who had never wanted her burden but had somehow become her salvation. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new threats, but tonight, she was exactly where she belonged. The morning sun cast long shadows through the cabin window as Eleanor traced the scars on Taza's chest. They lay entwined in the narrow bed, a tangle of limbs and shared warmth that still felt like a miracle. Each mark told a story, battles fought, animals hunted, a life lived hard and alone. "This one?" she asked, touching a jagged line near his ribs. "Mountain cat. I was young, foolish, thought I could take her cubs." His hand covered hers. "She taught me respect." Eleanor kissed the old wound gently, feeling him tense beneath her lips, even after weeks of sharing a bed. These tender gestures still caught him off guard. She was learning his body like a new language, where he welcomed touch, where old pains still lingered. "Tell me," she said quietly, settling against his shoulder. "About before, about her." Taza went still. Eleanor had been patient, waiting for him to share this pain he carried like a stone in his chest. Last night, she'd woken to find him sitting by the dying fire, staring at something she couldn't see. The ghosts were growing heavier between them. Ayanna was her name, he finally said, the words rough as gravel. "Morning flower. We were promised to each other from childhood. She was—" He paused, searching. "Light itself, always laughing, always moving, like water over stones." Eleanor waited, her hand resting over his heart. "The elders wanted children, many children. Our union was meant to strengthen bloodlines, build the tribe's future." His voice turned bitter. "She gave them what they wanted. 5 pregnancies in 6 years. The first 2 lived, strong boys. The third was born wrong, died within hours. The fourth, she bled so much, the medicine woman saved her, but said no more. Ayanna's body needed rest, but they didn't listen," Eleanor guessed, knowing too well how women's bodies became communal property. "The council pressed. My mother pressed. Even Ayanna felt the duty, though I begged her to wait." His arm tightened around Eleanor. "The 5th killed her. She labored for 2 days. I held her as she bled out, the baby dying with her. She was 23. Eleanor felt tears slip down her cheeks, understanding flooding through her. "That's why you live apart, why you never wanted—" "I swore that day I'd never put another woman through that, never watch another bright spirit extinguished for the sake of duty." He turned to look at her, eyes fierce. "Then they forced you on me, this broken white woman. They said, Barren, they said—" I was angry at first, another attempt to make me conform. But then, Eleanor prompted when he fell silent. "Then I saw you trying so hard to prove your worth through work. Saw your relief when I said I wanted no children. Saw you bloom like a desert flower when no one demanded anything from your womb." His hand cupped her face. "You were healing, and watching you heal. Healed something in me, too." Eleanor kissed him deeply, tasting salt from her own tears. When they broke apart, she placed his hand on her flat belly. "This body will never quicken with life. The doctors confirmed it. My womb is tilted wrong, scarred from childhood fever. Even if Samuel had been whole, I could never have given him sons." "Good," Taza said fiercely. "Let it stay empty. Let you stay whole. I've seen enough women die for men's legacy." They made love then with desperate tenderness, each touch a promise, each kiss a vow. Eleanor had never felt so cherished, so complete. With Samuel, coupling had been a grim duty, endured in hopes of conception. With Taza, it was communion, 2 souls recognizing each other across all boundaries. Afterward, as they lay breathless and entwined, Eleanor traced the medicine wheel tattooed on his shoulder. "Your people will expect you to take another wife, one who can bear children. My people can expect what they like. I choose you. Only you. But your bloodline. There are other ways to leave a mark on this world than through blood." He kissed her forehead. "The children you teach, The gardens you grow, the bridges you build between our peoples. That's legacy enough. That afternoon, Eleanor worked in her hidden meadow, preparing the soil for spring planting. The snow had melted in this sheltered spot, revealing rich earth. As she worked, she thought about Ayanna, about all the women who died trying to fulfill impossible expectations. Her own barrenness, once her greatest shame, now felt like armor. Maria found her there as the sun began to sink. The older woman moved slowly, her arthritis worse in the cold months. "You glow different," she observed, settling on a flat stone. "Like woman well loved." Eleanor blushed but didn't deny it. "Taza told me about Ayanna." Maria's face softened with old sorrow. "Ah, good he finally speaks of her. That pain poisoned him too long." She studied Eleanor shrewdly. "You understand now why some saw you as gift? A woman who cannot bear children but can still love. For him, perfect answer." "I'm nobody's answer," Eleanor said sharply. "I'm just myself." "Yes," Maria agreed, smiling. "That's why it works. You don't try to be her. You don't try to fix him. You just be together." That evening, Eleanor returned to find Taza had prepared dinner, venison stew with wild onions and herbs. They ate in comfortable silence, but she noticed he kept glancing at her, something clearly on his mind. "What is it?" she finally asked. He set down his bowl and retrieved something wrapped in deerskin from a high shelf. "I made this after the fever took you. Wasn't sure. Wasn't ready." He handed her the bundle. Inside was a necklace, delicate beadwork in patterns that seemed to dance, centered around a piece of turquoise the color of deep water. The craftsmanship was exquisite, each bead placed with intention and care. "Taza," she breathed. "It's beautiful." "It's a marriage necklace," he said quietly. "If you wear it, everyone will know. No question, no doubt. Oh, you're my wife. I'm your husband. In my people's eyes, in your God's eyes, in our own eyes." Eleanor's hands trembled as she held it. "The Whitmores will say it's not legal. The church will say it's not valid." "What do you say?" She thought of the elaborate church wedding to Samuel, the white dress that had cost more than most families saw in a year, the hundreds of guests she didn't know, the priest who spoke of wifely duty and submission, all that ceremony, all that legitimacy, and it had been nothing but a pretty prison. "I say yes," she whispered. "I say we decide what's valid." Taza fastened the necklace around her throat with careful hands. The beads were cool against her skin, but seemed to warm immediately, as if accepting her. He kissed the nape of her neck, then turned her to face him. "In my tradition, we make vows not of possession but of choice. I choose you, Eleanor, as you are. Empty womb, full heart, stubborn spirit. I vow to stand beside you, never above you. To build a life where you can grow wild and free as the flowers you tend. To never ask you to be less than yourself for my comfort or my people's expectations." Eleanor's voice was thick with tears as she responded. "I choose you, Taza, as you are. Wounded warrior, gentle protector, man who sees me whole. I vow to stand beside you, never behind you, to make a home where your spirit can rest from its wandering. To never ask you to be other than yourself, for my comfort or my people's approval." They sealed these vows not in front of witnesses, but alone, as they had learned to exist, two souls making their own way outside the boundaries others had drawn. That night, they celebrated their self-made marriage with quiet joy. And when Eleanor lay in Taza's arms afterward, wearing nothing but the beaded necklace, she thought of all the women who measured their worth by their fertility. She thought of Ayanna, dying for duty. She thought of herself, discarded as worthless. "We're free," she whispered into the darkness. "Both of us, free from their expectations. Free to choose." Taza agreed, pulling her closer. "And I choose you, again and again, every sunrise." As sleep took them, Eleanor touched the necklace at her throat and smiled. She had been banished for being barren, given to a man who whispered, "I never wanted children." And in that strange twist of fate, she had found not exile but homecoming, not shame but celebration, not emptiness but the fullest life she'd ever known. Tomorrow the world might challenge their choice. The Whitmores might return, the tribal council might object, the law might try to tear them apart. But tonight, in their cabin at the edge of the world, Eleanor and Taza were complete, not despite what they couldn't give each other, but because of what they could. The black-robed figure of Reverend Marcus Whitfield appeared like a crow against the spring snow, leading a procession of riders toward the Apache settlement. Eleanor spotted them from the hillside where she'd been gathering early herbs with Maria and several other women. Her blood ran cold as she recognized not just Thomas Whitmore among the group, but her own sister's husband, Henry Morrison, from California. "Run!" Maria urged. But Eleanor stood frozen. They had found her sister, had brought her all this way. What lies had they told to make that happen? The riders dismounted at the center of the settlement, where Chief Joseph and the council were already gathering. Eleanor made her way down, her heart pounding. Taza materialized at her side as if from air, his hand finding hers. "Eleanor!" Her sister Margaret's voice cracked across the distance. She broke from the group, her traveling dress mud-stained, her face drawn with exhaustion and worry. "Oh, Eleanor, thank God you're alive!" The sisters embraced, and Eleanor felt Margaret trembling. "What did they tell you?" Eleanor whispered urgently. "That you'd been kidnapped," Margaret whispered back. "That savages were holding you prisoner. Henry borrowed money we don't have for the journey. Said it was his Christian duty to save you." Before Eleanor could respond, Reverend Whitfield's voice boomed across the gathering. "We have come to rescue this Christian woman from her captivity and return her to civilization where she belongs." Chief Joseph, dignified despite his advancing years, responded in measured English. "The woman is not captive. She is wife to one of our people. She stays by choice. Heathen marriages are not recognized by God or law," Whitfield declared. "She is still legally bound to Samuel Whitmore, who has graciously agreed to forgive her circumstances and take her back." Eleanor stepped forward, feeling Taza tense beside her. "I'm not going back. I've made my choice clear." Henry Morrison pushed forward then, his thin face twisted with disgust. "You've been contaminated by these savages. Eleanor, look at you, dressed like them, marked by their heathen jewelry." His eyes fixed on her marriage necklace with revulsion. "Margaret has been sick with worry. How can you shame your family like this?" "My family?" Eleanor's voice rose. "Where was my family when the Whitmores beat me? Where was my family when I was sold like cattle? You knew, Henry. You all knew what they did to me. And you did nothing." "Discipline between husband and wife is private," Henry began. "Discipline?" Eleanor laughed bitterly. "Is that what you call broken ribs, split lips, examinations that left me bleeding for days?" She turned to Margaret. "Did they tell you that part? Did they tell you how your sister was discarded when her womb proved empty?" Margaret's face had gone pale. "Eleanor, please, come home with us. We'll find you a position somewhere, perhaps as a governess." "I have a home," Eleanor interrupted. "I have a husband who values me for more than my ability to breed. I have work that matters. I teach children. I grow medicine. I am building a life of meaning." Reverend Whitfield raised his Bible. "You live in sin with a godless savage. Your immortal soul," his words cut off as Taza stepped forward, his presence commanding immediate silence. "You call me godless," he said, his English precise and cutting. "Yet your God tells you to love your neighbor, and you show only hate. Your God says to care for the suffering, yet you sent this woman to us broken and bleeding inside. Which of us follows your God's teaching better? You dare quote scripture at me? Heathen?" Whitfield sputtered. "I dare speak truth." Taza replied, "Eleanor came to us empty-handed and empty-hearted. We gave her purpose, respect, love. Your people gave her only pain and shame. If your God approves of how you treated her, then yes, I reject your God." The tension ratcheted higher. Several Apache warriors had gathered. while Whitfield's group clutched their weapons nervously. Eleanor knew violence balanced on a knife's edge. Then, unexpected support came from within the Apache gathering. Sun Sayore stepped forward, the elderly medicine woman's presence commanding respect. "I have watched this woman," she said in accented but clear English. "She honors our ways. She learns our language. She heals with plants as I taught her. Her spirit is good. The man who claims her from far away, his spirit is sick. We smell the violence on him like old blood." One by one, other women stepped forward. Maria spoke of Eleanor's generous heart. Nayeli praised her teaching of the children. Even women who had been suspicious at first added their voices to the chorus of support. Margaret was crying now. "Eleanor, I don't understand. How can you choose this life? How can you turn your back on your own people, your own God?" Eleanor took her sister's hands. "I haven't turned my back on God. Margaret, I've found him here, in the kindness of strangers who became family, in the love of a man who sees me whole, in the purpose I've discovered beyond the narrow role I was forced into. But you're legally married to a man who beat me, blamed me, and sold me." Eleanor's voice was steel. "If that's what Christian marriage looks like, I want no part of it." Thomas Whitmore had been growing increasingly agitated. Now he exploded. "Enough of this nonsense. She's coming with us if we have to drag her." He reached for Eleanor, but Taza moved faster. Thomas found himself on the ground, Taza's knife at his throat. The other men went for their guns, but Apache rifles were already trained on them. "Stop!" Eleanor cried out. "No blood, please!" For a moment, violence teetered on the edge of erupting. Then Chief Joseph's voice cut through like a blade. "The woman has spoken. She stays by choice. You leave by command. Now!" Reverend Whitfield's face was purple with rage. "This isn't over. We'll return with the army, with federal marshals, with whatever force necessary to retrieve this Christian woman from your clutches. Then you'll find a war." Chief Joseph said simply, "Is one woman worth that much blood?" Henry Morrison was already backing toward his horse, pulling Margaret with him. But Margaret broke free and ran to Eleanor one last time. "I love you," she whispered, embracing her sister. "I don't understand, but I can see you're not suffering. You're glowing. Be happy for me," Eleanor whispered back. "And don't let them come back, for everyone's sake." Margaret nodded, tears streaming. As the group mounted their horses, she called out, "I'll tell them you died. Fever took you. I'll make them believe it." It was the greatest gift her sister could give her, a chance to truly disappear from her old life. Eleanor raised her hand in farewell, watching until the riders vanished over the ridge. The settlement slowly returned to normal activities, but Eleanor stood rooted, shaking with reaction. Taza's arms came around her from behind, solid and warm. "You chose us again," he murmured against her hair. "In front of everyone. I'll choose you every time," Eleanor replied, turning in his arms. "They can send priests or armies or the devil himself. My answer won't change." That night, the settlement held a ceremony. Not for Eleanor, she had already been accepted, but for solidarity. Chief Joseph spoke of the threats that would come, the pressure that would mount. The people voted to stand firm, to protect their own. As Eleanor sat beside Taza at the council fire, wearing her Apache dress and marriage necklace, she thought about the Reverend's words, contaminated. He'd called her. Perhaps he was right. She had been contaminated. By freedom, by respect, by love that asked nothing but her authentic self. The fire crackled, sending sparks into the night sky like prayers. Around her, the people who had become her true family shared food and stories. Taza's hand was warm in hers, his presence a steady comfort. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The government might come, as threatened. Her old life might try once more to reclaim her. But tonight, Eleanor was exactly where she belonged. Not rescued, but choosing. Not saved, but finally, truly free. "No regrets?" Taza asked quietly as they walked back to their cabin under the stars. Eleanor stopped, pulling him close for a kiss that tasted of smoke and promises. Only one, she said when they parted. That it took being banished to find home. He smiled then, rare and beautiful. Sometimes we must lose everything to discover what matters. As they entered their cabin together, Eleanor touched her marriage necklace and sent a silent prayer of thanks for the barren womb that had led her to this fertile life. She had been given to an Apache who whispered, "I never wanted children," and in that seeming tragedy had found her greatest triumph, a love that needed nothing but itself to be complete. Spring had fully arrived in the mountains, and Eleanor's hidden meadow bloomed with the fruits of her careful planning. Neat rows of corn sprouted alongside bean plants that would soon climb their stalks, while squash vines spread their broad leaves between the three sisters, Maria had called them, each plant supporting and nourishing the others. It had been 2 months since the confrontation with Whitfield's group, and true to Margaret's promise, word had apparently spread of Eleanor's death from fever. No more riders had come seeking her. The settlement had relaxed back into its rhythms, and Eleanor had thrown herself into building this new life with focused determination. Today, she knelt in the rich soil, transplanting herbs from the wild patches she'd discovered, plants Sun Siahre had taught her to identify for their healing properties. Her hands were dark with earth, her hair escaping its braid, when she heard the children approaching. "Mrs. Eleanor, Mrs. Eleanor!" Little Fox came running, followed by a gaggle of other children from the settlement. At 7 years old, he was one of her most eager students, quick with languages and always full of questions. "What is it?" Eleanor smiled, brushing dirt from her hands. "There's a new family. They brought a boy who can't hear. Medicine Eagle says you might know how to help." Eleanor's heart quickened. She followed the children back to the settlement, where indeed a new family had arrived. Refugees from another band where conflict with settlers had grown too dangerous. The parents looked exhausted, shoulders bent with the weight of displacement. But it was the child who drew Eleanor's attention, a boy of perhaps 9, with intelligent eyes that darted everywhere, taking in his new surroundings with sharp awareness. The boy's mother was trying to communicate something to Sun Siahre, growing frustrated when gestures failed to convey meaning. Eleanor approached slowly, memories stirring from years ago when her mother had worked with a deaf child in their town. "May I?" Eleanor asked, kneeling before the boy. She caught his attention, then slowly, deliberately signed a simple greeting she remembered. The boy's eyes widened with shock and hope. His hands flew in response, too fast for Eleanor to follow, but she caught enough to understand. He had language, just not spoken words. Over the following weeks, Eleanor dove into creating a bridge between the boy, whose name sign translated roughly to Silent Thunder, and his new community. She dredged up every sign she could remember, invented new ones with the boy's help, and began teaching other children basic signs. Soon, Silent Thunder was no longer isolated, but integrated, his quick mind and wicked sense of humor emerging once communication barriers fell. "You see?" Maria said one afternoon, watching Eleanor teach a mixed class of Apache and sign language to a dozen eager children. "This is why the Creator brought you here, not just for Taza, but for this, bridges where others see only walls." The teaching work grew. Eleanor found herself instructing not just children but adults who wanted to learn English for trading or writing for keeping records. She taught Apache women some of the white women's cooking techniques that used less precious fuel, while learning their methods of food preservation that far surpassed anything she'd known. Knowledge flowed both ways, creating something new. One evening, as Eleanor worked on creating picture cards for Silent Thunder's lessons, Taza entered with something cradled in his arms. "Close your eyes," he instructed. Eleanor obeyed, hearing him set something on the table. "Open." Before her sat a beautifully crafted wooden box, its lid carved with intricate designs of flowers and vines. Inside, neat compartments held writing materials, precious paper, ink, pens, and even a small slate for the children's lessons. "Taza," she breathed, running her fingers over the smooth wood. "When did you—" "Winter nights are long," he said simply. "I wanted you to have proper tools for your teaching." She threw her arms around him, not caring that she knocked over her stack of cards. "It's perfect. You're perfect." He held her close, his laugh rumbling through his chest. "Hardly perfect, but I'm learning to see through your eyes. The work you do matters." As summer approached, Eleanor's role in the settlement had solidified into something vital. She was the bridge builder, the teacher, the keeper of healing plants. Women sought her advice on everything from difficult births, where her knowledge of white women's midwifery techniques had saved lives, to preserving food through the hot months ahead. But it was the addition of Singing Bird that truly completed their household. The girl appeared one dawn like a ghost, perhaps 12 years old, rail thin, with haunted eyes and feet bloody from walking. She collapsed at the edge of the settlement, speaking a dialect none of them recognized fully. Taza was among those who found her, and something in her broken story, orphaned, escaped from soldiers who had killed her family, struck deep in him. "We take her in," he announced that evening. In a tone that brooked no argument, Eleanor looked at the child huddled by their fire, dressed now in borrowed clothes, flinching at sudden movements. "Of course we do." Healing Singing Bird became their shared purpose. Eleanor coaxed food into her, small portions that her starved stomach could handle. Taza taught her basic survival skills, always patient with her fearful starts and long silences. Slowly, like a wounded animal learning to trust, Singing Bird began to emerge from her trauma. The first time she smiled, at a silly face Silent Thunder made during lessons, Eleanor had to turn away to hide her tears. The first time she laughed, at Taza trying to help with laundry and turning everything pink with berry juice. The sound was rusty, but real. "She calls you mother in her sleep," Taza told Eleanor one night as they lay together, Singing Bird safely asleep in the corner they'd sectioned off for her. "She calls you father when she's awake," Eleanor replied softly. They were quiet for a long moment, the weight of unexpected parenthood settling over them. Then Taza spoke, his voice thoughtful. "I said I never wanted children. I meant I never wanted to create them, watch them grow in suffering. But this, taking in one who already exists, who needs us, this feels different. Like the difference between possession and protection." Eleanor murmured, "We're not continuing a bloodline. We're saving a life." As the summer months passed, their small family solidified. Singing Bird grew stronger, her natural joy emerging as the shadows receded. She showed aptitude for Eleanor's plant work, learning to identify and harvest with careful hands. She also displayed a gift for music, her high, clear voice joining the evening songs around the settlement fires. The day Singing Bird first called Eleanor mother aloud, not in sleep but in waking conversation. Eleanor had to excuse herself to cry in private. When she returned, Taza caught her eye with a look of such profound understanding that she fell in love with him all over again. Their cabin expanded that summer, Taza and several other men adding a proper room for Singing Bird. With a window facing the sunrise she loved to watch. Eleanor helped her decorate it with pressed flowers and the colorful weavings Maria had taught them both to make. "Are we a real family?" Singing Bird asked one evening as they prepared dinner together. "Even though I didn't come from your body." Eleanor gathered the girl close, pressing a kiss to her dark hair. "The realest family is the one we choose. Little bird, the one we build with love and daily choice. Blood makes relatives. Choice makes family." Taza entered then, carrying fresh rabbit for dinner, and Singing Bird ran to show him the new weaving pattern she'd mastered. Watching them together, her husband, who'd never wanted children, teaching this not-quite daughter with patience and pride, Eleanor touched her flat belly with wonder rather than shame. She had been given to an Apache who whispered, "I never wanted children." And together they had discovered that creating life meant so much more than biology. They were creating a future through every child taught, every bridge built between worlds, every wound healed with plant medicine and patient care. That night, as their chosen family sat together in their expanded home, Taza carving while Eleanor wrote lessons and Singing Bird practiced her weaving, peace settled over them like a blanket. Outside, The world still held its threats and prejudices. The Whitmores still existed somewhere, as did those who would never understand their choice. But inside these walls they'd built with their own hands, filled with the family they'd gathered rather than generated. Eleanor knew a contentment deeper than anything her old life had promised. She was a mother without giving birth, a teacher without formal education, a healer without certification, all roles that flourished precisely because they were chosen rather than expected. "Tell us again about the hidden meadow flowers," Singing Bird requested sleepily as bedtime approached. "About how they grow wild but still in harmony." And Eleanor did, weaving a story about plants that supported each other, that bloomed in their season without jealousy, that created beauty not for approval, but simply because it was their nature. It was their story too, she realized. A family growing wild and free, beautiful in its intentional choosing, stronger for being transplanted than they ever could have been in their original soil. The winter came harder than any in memory, bringing with it both bitter cold and the fever that spread through the settlement like wildfire. Eleanor worked alongside Sansia Ray and the other healers, moving from dwelling to dwelling with medicines and prayers. Her knowledge of white man's remedies combined with Apache plant wisdom proved invaluable. Willow bark tea for fever, steam treatments with pine needles for congested lungs, careful nutrition for weakened bodies. Singing Bird fell ill on the 3rd week, her small body burning with fever despite all their efforts. Eleanor didn't leave her side for 3 days, applying cool cloths and spooning medicine between cracked lips. Taza was equally devoted, singing the old songs his mother had sung to him, his voice breaking with fear they wouldn't speak aloud. On the 4th dawn, the fever broke. Singing Bird opened clear eyes and whispered, "I'm hungry." Eleanor wept with relief while Taza prepared thin broth with shaking hands. They had come so close to losing what they'd never thought to have, this daughter of choice who had filled spaces in their hearts they hadn't known were empty. The crisis passed, but it had taken its toll. Several elders had died, including old Joseph, who had been so instrumental in protecting Eleanor's choice to stay. Food stores ran dangerously low as hunters couldn't travel far in the deep snow. The settlement pulled together, sharing what little they had, but Eleanor could see the gaunt faces and worried eyes. Then came an unexpected salvation. Thomas Whitmore appeared at the settlement's edge, not with soldiers or demands, but with 3 wagons of supplies. Eleanor hardly recognized him at first. His arrogant bearing had been replaced by something humbler, more weathered. "I come in peace," he called out, hands raised, "with payment for old debts." Taza and several warriors met him, weapons ready but not raised. Eleanor stayed back, her heart pounding. What new trick was this? "Your sister kept her word," Thomas said, speaking directly to where Eleanor stood. "She spread news of your death so convincingly that even Father believed it. Samuel took another wife, a young widow with a son already, proving she could bear children." His mouth twisted. "Funny thing, though, she's been married to him 2 years now with no new babies." Doctor finally admitted what he'd suspected all along. Problem was never with the women. Eleanor felt no satisfaction, only a distant pity. "Why are you here, Thomas?" "Because I've seen what pride costs," he said simply. "Samuel drinks now, bitter with the knowledge. Father had a stroke last year. He can't speak, can barely move. The ranch is failing, and I remember you tried to tell us about the beatings, about the cruelty. We didn't listen." He gestured to the wagons. "Flour, salt pork, blankets, medicine, not charity. Payment for a debt that can't really be repaid. And this," he pulled out a leather portfolio. "Legal papers. Your marriage to Samuel has been annulled on grounds of abandonment. You're free in white law as well as Apache. If that matters to you." Eleanor stepped forward, studying this changed man. "And what do you want in return?" "Nothing," Thomas said, "except maybe forgiveness someday. When you can." She looked at the wagons of desperately needed supplies, at her people, for they were her people now, gathering hopefully. Then at Taza, who nodded slightly. Whatever Thomas's motives, the settlement needed this. The supplies are welcome, Eleanor said formally. As for forgiveness, that's a journey, not a destination, but you've taken the first step. As the wagons were unloaded, Thomas paused before leaving. You look well, Eleanor. Happy. That matters more than I understood before. Spring returned slowly, and with it came changes. The government's attention had turned to conflicts elsewhere, leaving the mountain settlements in relative peace. Trade resumed with nearby towns, and Eleanor found her skills as a translator and mediator increasingly valuable. She helped negotiate fair prices for Apache crafts, translated during medical emergencies when white doctors were needed, and slowly built bridges of understanding where before had been only fear. Singing Bird grew tall and strong, her quick mind absorbing languages like a sponge. She spoke Apache, English, Spanish, and the sign language Eleanor had developed with Silent Thunder. Her gift for communication made her a natural diplomat. Moving between worlds with grace, Eleanor envied. She'll go far, Sansiare said one day, watching Singing Bird help teach the younger children. Maybe to the white schools, learn their ways to help our people. Eleanor's heart clenched at the thought of losing her, but she knew it was true. They were raising Singing Bird to soar, not to be caged by anyone's limitations, including their own. That evening, a celebration filled the settlement. The spring planting was complete. Babies had been born healthy through the winter, and connections with neighboring communities, both Apache and white, were stronger than ever. Eleanor wore her finest Apache dress, the beadwork catching firelight as she danced with the other women. Taza caught her as she spun past, pulling her into the shadows between buildings. You shine tonight, he murmured, kissing her deeply. We survived. Eleanor laughed against his lips. Winter, illness, the past trying to reclaim us. We're still here, still choosing each other, he agreed, his hands warm on her waist. They returned to the celebration to find Singing Bird performing with the drummers, her voice rising pure and strong above the rhythm. Silent Thunder danced nearby, his joy needing no words to express. Other children Eleanor had taught wove between the adults, mixing Apache and English words freely, embodying the bridge between worlds she'd helped build. As the night wound down, Eleanor found herself sitting with Maria and Sansiare, watching the young ones play. Do you ever regret? Maria asked quietly. Not having babies from your body? Eleanor considered, her hand moving unconsciously to her flat stomach. I thought I would, she admitted. I thought that ache would never leave, but look, she gestured to the children running past, to Singing Bird helping serve food to elders, to Silent Thunder showing younger boys his hunting skills. I have dozens of children. I've helped birth babies, taught them to read, healed their hurts. My influence will live in all of them, the mother of many, though bearing none. Sansiare said approvingly, Your womb may be closed, but your heart stays open. That is the greater gift. As families began departing for their homes, Eleanor and Taza collected a very sleepy Singing Bird. The girl mumbled protests about not being tired even as she swayed on her feet. Taza scooped her up easily, though she was getting almost too big for such carrying, and they made their way home. Tell me again, Singing Bird murmured as they tucked her into bed. About how you found each other. Eleanor sat on the bed's edge, smoothing dark hair from the girl's forehead. I was given to your father because I couldn't have babies. He didn't want me at first. Didn't want anyone. But slowly, we learned that being broken in the world's eyes didn't mean being worthless. We chose to heal together. And then you chose me, Singing Bird whispered, already half asleep. The easiest choice we ever made, Taza said softly. Later, as Eleanor and Taza lay in their own bed, moonlight streaming through the window, she traced the marriage necklace she still wore every day. Could you have imagined, she asked, that day you said you never wanted children? Could you have imagined this? No, he admitted, pulling her close. I imagined only avoiding pain, not finding joy. You taught me the difference between creating life and nurturing it, between possession and gift. Eleanor smiled in the darkness, thinking of their unconventional family, their chosen tribe, their life built on the ruins of what others would call failure. She had been banished for being barren, given to an Apache who whispered, "I never wanted children." And from that seeming tragedy had grown a love story neither of them could have imagined, one that needed no biological heirs to be complete, one that created legacy through every life touched and bridge built. "I love you," she whispered, meaning not just Taza, but this entire life they'd woven together. Singing Bird asleep in the next room, the settlement that had become home, the children she taught, the plants she grew, the healing she offered. "And I love you," Taza replied, understanding all she meant. "My barren wife who brings forth abundance wherever she walks." Outside, coyotes sang to the moon while the spring wind carried promise of summer's growth. Inside their hand-built home, a family that shouldn't exist by any conventional measure rested in perfect contentment, proof that sometimes the greatest blessings come disguised as curses, and the deepest love grows in the most unexpected soil. In the years to come, Singing Bird would indeed go to school in the East, returning with knowledge to help her people navigate the changing world. Silent Thunder would become a renowned artist, his paintings bridging cultures without words. The children Eleanor taught would become leaders, negotiators, teachers themselves. Her garden would feed generations, her medical knowledge would save countless lives, and her story would be whispered around fires, the tale of a barren woman and a man who wanted no children, who together created a legacy of chosen family and intentional love that outlasted any bloodline. But tonight, in the quiet darkness with her husband's heartbeat steady beneath her palm and their daughter safe in the next room, Eleanor simply existed in the perfect present, no longer banished but home, no longer empty but overflowing, no longer defined by what she couldn't do but celebrated for all she could. And that, she knew, was the greatest triumph of all. Thank you, dear listeners, for joining us around the Wild West Campfire, for this tale of love, acceptance, and chosen family. We'd love to hear where you're listening from, whether it's during your morning commute, a late-night wind-down, or perhaps even from your own corner of the American West. Please subscribe to Wild West Campfire for more stories that explore the untold lives and loves of frontier America. And share your thoughts in the comments below. Did Eleanor and Taza's unconventional love story touch your heart? We're eager to hear your reflections on what makes a family and where true worth comes from. Until next time, keep the campfire burning and the stories flowing.